Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Every leader has a journey, and with a leader speak, we're trying to understand their journey, learn from their experiences. And today, we have Durley with us for a day in the life of a CISO. He loves to deep dive into cyber problems and solve them with modern solutions. Ever since he was a little kid, protecting people has been his passion. His white knight complex led him to become a soldier, and his love for computers pulled him towards information security. He has learned many things in his leadership positions throughout the last 20 years in cybersecurity, information security, governance, risk, and compliance. And today, he will be sharing his experiences with us. Thank you so much, Durley, for joining me today.
Yes, and thank you for having me on your show.
So we will start off, Durley, with your daily function as a CISO. How does the daily function of a CISO look like?
It really is going to determine on a couple of things, right? If you're working in a traditional role where you go into work and depending on the availability of, your teams and what I like to call, or what we like to use the term in the military, a battle rhythm. Every week, every day, you may have certain stand-up calls or certain meetings. Every company is different because your boss or some other key stakeholders may have recurring meetings. But typically in the mornings, what I like to do is kind of go over, maybe the top threat intel that is being seen, what vulnerabilities are out that day or that week. And then what I like to describe as creative activities. Is there any administrative task or writing new policies, anything that's more creative, I like to do in the morning while I'm waking up. And then try not to do any meetings until after 10 a.m. Once my the wheels are spinning better, and then from there try to tackle task. I try and use some of the Tim Ferriss method and some other modern methods of managing tasks, where you try to accomplish maybe the top two things, and that's pretty much how I prioritize. Now, there's always going to be, five alarm fires where there could be a potential incident that you got to investigate, things like that, something that the board needs right away that you got to work on. But usually on the average day, trying to figure out what are the one or two things you can focus on, and trying to get those accomplishes is really key, because if you go chasing too many rabbits, you're never going to catch at least one.
Now that CISOs are getting seat at the table with the board, if you are allowed to make one change in the organization, what would it be to make the life of for all in the organization better?
So, of course, the context of that question is more like for the security posture, right? To make the security posture better, and the whole point of that is to focus on reducing liability and then risk before you think about controls. And every company, like I said, is different, right? When you're designing security or trying to improve the security posture, it's like making a custom suit. So, like in my current organization, I don't sit on the board, but I have at others. Most organizations, there is a lack of education, communication, and resources, especially when you're working with small and mid-sized companies. So I think in a combination to, trying to implement any one, even a strategic level control or best practice, you're also trying to lobby to stay on the mind and the radar of the senior key stakeholders and senior management, so they can stay situationally aware of the liabilities and the information security risks that are affecting their organization. At least at a bare minimum, to provide some due diligence, right? And that you're informing them, and in that way, when the time comes to look at the next year's budget, they're taking those things into consideration. And I would add to that, even as a bare minimum, at least that you're notifying them of the risk, because at the end of the day, security is a business operations issue. It's not a technical issue. So the head of security or CISO doesn't own the risk, right? It's usually the risk owner, and depending on what area of the business the risk is coming from, it could be the CFO, a COO, or the CTO at the end of the day, or even the board and the CEO.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. And now, on the same lines, now when a new CISO joins,
Hmm.
they have a lot to work on. They have to understand the strategies for the organization. And I've
Yeah,
been hearing about 30, 60, 90 days, like especially for the new CISO, these 30, 60, 90 days plan is very, very important. So could
yeah.
you please share some advices from your experiences that if let's say a new CISO joins an organization, what should be their plan that should be executed in the first few days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just happen to have a plan. On my LinkedIn is it's one of my articles I wrote. It got a lot of traction. I basically posted what I do initially as a VCSO before I became, a head of security full time. But usually between 90 to 120 days, you're basically doing a full security assessment in combination of picking up the slack from whoever the last head of security was or CISO and trying to learn the business all rolled into one. I personally use like NIST CSF, but you could do the same thing with Top 20 or some other framework. But you go through the motions of trying to understand the business. What's the mission? What's the different lines of business? Who are the key stakeholders? And then once you get a good understanding of that, you start diving deep into the artifacts in parallel, maybe in interviewing like your peers and other key stakeholders. So you want to know, what your CFO cares about, what the head of HR concerns are, because they also have information systems that come straight out of their budget that may not be managed by the IT department. Different information systems for HR they may have, different data implications. Because if you have employees from both the U.S. and Europe, then GDPR also applies to your HR information systems. So you're also looking at all your current tools, software, hardware, last SOC reports and other audit reports, right? You're trying to dive headfirst into all of the company from a security posture and business operations standpoint. But at the end of all that, whether you take the 90-day or 120-day route, you're going to want to present, I think, at a minimum to your boss, whoever you report to, or idealistically, all the senior management, what you're finding. You would follow up with some kind of roadmap, and this is where I think we should get in 24 months. I know Gary Hipsey he does 36 months. I think it things change too fast, especially in a small company to do 36 months. So I'll kind of play with 24 months versus 36, just depending on the company's culture and how fast things are changing. But you want to have a good 2 to 3 year roadmap, to present. This is where I think we should be, right? And it's not set in stone. It can be dynamic, right, depending on resources and what the priorities are at that time. And it changes even within the first 6 months after you get the go from senior management. It could change, and you can slide some things to a next quarter or next half of the year, right? Just depending on what the culture and the business goals and the resource availability is. You're going to have to being patient and being able to compromise are very two big soft skills that you're going to have in order to do this role.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And when you are doing so much around the strategy, you are having a forecast for the upcoming few months, like maybe 24 months, maybe 36 months, based on the size of the organization. You will
Yeah,
have to handle the board. So when you're handling the board, especially when it comes to the budget for security, how would
yeah,
you take the buy-in from them?
yeah. So I think as one of the things that's going to help you throughout your whole tenure at whatever company is during the initial 120-day assessment, when you're interviewing this anyone with a C-suite or a senior stakeholder that manages a line of business or a department, or the board and the CEO, right? I always ask, I try to map based on like SASBA model, what are the business goals? And then you map those to the business goals for security. So if your business goal is to maintain the reputation of the company, then you map what the business goals for security would be based on that, right? And they're usually strategic, right? We're going to try to maintain our SOC type 2, we're going to try to adhere to all NIST, CSF, things like that. So that way, later on, when you're not achieving those goals, you can say, look, you're not going to achieve your business goals, which is to maintain customer trust or to be GDPR compliant and things like that. You know, so have your business goals changed, right? And naturally, most companies aren't going to change their business goals to maintain reputation or customer trust or be compliant with GDPR, right? So they're going to have to make a decision whether to accept the risk or change the business goal. So that's a way, that a really good method to try to motivate and convince and lobby. I also try to use storytelling without trying to use fear tactics, which in cybersecurity or information security, it's very challenging because the motivator is reducing liability or risk, which can be scary, right? So there's a delicate balance there. And I think just documenting and trying to lobby and making good business case throughout the year to where if your company wants to wait to a certain time frame to tell me everything you need for the budget and why, it's just a reminder and not so much a flood of this is everything I need, and then they need a deep dive, or they panic because now you're asking for 30 things and you didn't talk about it earlier in the year. I find all those different tactics, and it's just a lot of consistency of just communication and education, so they're not blindsided when it comes to, making those budget requests at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, depending on the company's method.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Now, based on your experience, we would like to take some advice from you for the
Okay.
budding CISOs. How can they start their career in cybersecurity as a CISO? People have been in the industry for years, and they feel that they are not ready to be a CISO. So how exactly they can be confident, they can feel that, yes, this is the role that I want to do now?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of different ways to accomplish that, right? And I think back when there wasn't a whole lot of CISOs, you could go in and be more from the risk side, 15 years ago, or get a degree from a great university. Lately, I see that they care more about your experience and technical skills, and soft skills. Can you talk to a board? Can you tell a story and explain your idea? Things like that. What I did is when I realized I wanted to get to the strategic level and then eventually a CISO, I looked at other people on LinkedIn or their resumes. I looked at what degrees they had, what certs they had, and reverse engineer so I could try to achieve that, right? So I made sure I got the same amount of degrees or more, the same amount of certs or more, the same amount of experience or more. Um, Also in the military, I went enlisted before I became an officer, even though I knew even as a child, I always wanted to be an officer. But I wanted to be the kind of officer other enlisted folks would respect. So I wanted to understand their point of view. I did the enlisted route first. And I think as a CISO, one of my benefits is that I did everything earlier in my IT career. I've had to program routers. I worked in a NOC. I work in a SOC. I've done security engineering. I've done pretty much everything except for application security and hardcore, ethical hacking. I got to a script kiddie level and played with the pineapple and got to learn Kali Linux, but I never fell in love with it. So I focused more on the network security engineering and architecture side, but I've done a lot of the roles. But it's a part of learning what does the market want, what are other people doing to get to that role, and then how do I see myself as a CISO? I didn't want to be that big business risk focused, even though I have an MBA, but very, not have any technical background. I wanted to be a CISO for the technical guys, but could speak to the business, right? Because a lot of your job is working with engineers, system administrators, network and application security engineers. And I want to be able to, one, have their respect, and two, be able to speak their language. And the best way to do that is to have some of that life experience that they've had. And that way, when you're asking them to do stuff, you're not asking them to do anything that you wouldn't expect yourself to do when you were in that role, or if you were in that similar position, right? And you can compromise and negotiate. It also helps you when you're asking for something. If they tell you that they're going to deliver it, it helps you gauge whether it's an appropriate amount of time or if it's complete BS, right? Is it, so it also gives you that little bit of insight to be able to throw a red flag that this is not true, or when you're doing an audit and assessment, something is wrong, because you perform those roles. And I find that to be, I didn't feel that way at the time when I was going through all these roles and taking a long path to get to where I am now. But now I look back and I feel like it's very valuable, that experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, really, for sharing all the wonderful insights. It was great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And you and any of your audience can connect with me on LinkedIn at Durley G.
Absolutely. I am sure there will be a lot of people who will connect back with you. And there's a lot to learn from you, from your military experience, from your information security experience as a CISO, as a virtual CISO. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who will be connecting back with you. Thank you.